Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, co-host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is February the 21st, 2024. It has been 3,677 days since Russia started covert military operation in Crimea, 10 years and 1 day since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 1 year and 362 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression against Ukraine. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Let's start with the daily assessment. 1. Ukraine's acute shortage of ammunition and air defense missiles continues to impact the battlefield and contributed to Ukraine's withdrawal from Avdiivka. 2. The main Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom aligned with our assessment that in the near term it is unlikely that Russia can convert its operational success in Avdiivka into further gains due to the need to establish military control of captured territory, extend and secure new ground lines of communication, and the unfavorable terrain west of the settlement. 3. It is unlikely that Russia will achieve its main operational goal of capturing the remaining areas of the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts and the areas east of the Oskil River in northern Kharkiv Oblast by March the 13th. 4. The United States has ended financial and military aid to Ukraine, unless there is an unforeseen event that changes congressional leadership before the 2024 elections. 5. The lack of media attention and the ending of US military aid has encouraged the Kremlin to be more transparent with committing grave breaches of the General Convention due to the lack of a meaningful response from international organizations. 6. Russian forces continue their offensive to capture Chasiv Yar west of Bakhmut. 7. Combat that closely resembles World War I trench warfare versus 21st century combined arms maneuver warfare will continue for the foreseeable future. 8. We maintain that while the possibility of an intentional nuclear accident caused by Russian occupiers at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains low, the condition is more serious than what the International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting. We begin today's war report in Kharkiv Oblast in the Kupiansk area of operation, or AO. Russian and Ukrainian sources reported mutual fighting west of Sinkivka, with no change in the situation. Ukrainian drones targeted Russian infantry fighting vehicles and troops south of Liman Pershey. Russian mercenary mail blogger Wargonzo claimed Russian troops tried to advance on Tabaevka and were unsuccessful. In Petropavlivka, a Russian one-way drone struck a civilian car with 3 farmers who were returning from checking on their fields. 2 men were killed, and the wife of the passenger was taken to the hospital with moderate injuries. In the Kremenная of Luhansk Oblast, Russian attempts to advance on Terny and Yampolivka were repulsed. In the Lysychansk AO, Russian and Ukrainian sources reported fighting continued in the area of Bilogorivka. Next, let's talk about the Donbas, starting in northeastern Donetsk Oblast. In the Siversk AO, Russian forces continued their attempts to advance on Vyimka from the southeast without success. Further south, in the Bakhmut AO, Russian sources reported attempts to advance on and past Bogdanivka continued, while Russian and Ukrainian sources reported fighting was ongoing east of Ivanivska. Continuing south to the Klishchiivka AO, fighting continued northwest, north and east of Klishchiivka and east of Andriivka. A Ukrainian one-way drone and a Stugna anti-tank guided missile, or ATGM, hit a Russian tank east of Kurdyumivka. The video suggests that Ukrainian forces fired from or on the edge of Zelenopillia, hinting there has been an advance southeast of Andriivka. Kramatorsk was hit by 2 Kh-22 anti-ship cruise missiles fired by a pair of Russian Tu-22 M3 bombers. An industrial area and an apartment building were hit, wounding 6 with 1 person missing. 9 more apartment buildings were damaged, along with the city's water purification system. Here's the situation in southwestern Donetsk, starting in the Avdiivka AO. A lot happened in the last 24 hours. Russian forces restarted attempts to advance on Stepove with no change to the situation. That is to say, Russian forces continue to get destroyed along the railroad grade. An article in the New York Times, citing unnamed senior Western officials and 2 Ukrainian soldiers, claimed that Russia captured between 850 and 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers during the retreat from Avdiivka. The spokesperson for the Tavria Strategic Operational Group, Dmytro Lychovy, denied the claim, calling the story, quote, misinformation, but acknowledged that a, quote, certain number of soldiers were missing. Moving to assessment. If Russia captured a full battalion of Ukrainian troops, we would be seeing pictures and videos everywhere. The number claimed in the New York Times is 33 to 50% of the number of Ukrainian troops who surrendered in Mariupol, and it would be the second largest surrender of either combatant since May 2022. In our assessment, the number of missing Ukrainian troops is in the dozens. While claims from soldiers at the platoon or company level can provide some intelligence, no one below the brigade level will have a clear picture. Ukrainian and Russian sources reported that Russian troops were conducting reconnaissance in force east of Lastochkina. A Russian advance with 6 IFVs and 1 tank ended catastrophically, with the loss of all 6 IFVs and most of the dismounts. Overnight, 2 Russian soldiers were able to enter Lastochkina and were eliminated. On the T-505 highway, now the Russian ground line of communication, GLOG, that's a supply line, from Spartak, Ukrainian one-way drones were interdicting Russian logistics. We'll link to a video in our situation report, and there is more information in the podcast description. Southwest of occupied Avdiivka, fighting continued in the no-man's land between Severne and Vodyane, near Pervomayske, and east of Nevelske. In occupied Donetsk, Russian occupation officials claimed Ukraine attacked the city. Videos and pictures that we linked to showed a large crater next to the library in the city center. The munition landed on the east side of the library on Artema Street, with a splash pattern indicating it came from the northeast or east. Due to its proximity to the building and the angle of the crater, the rocket could not have come from Free Ukraine. It is impossible. Yes, Russia fired on the people they have claimed for 10 years to be liberating. In the Marinka AO, Russian forces continued their attacks on the eastern edge of Georgievka and the southern edge of Marinka toward Pobeda. There was no significant change in the situation, and Russian Moblogger claims that Pobeda was captured are false. In the Vuhledar AO, the situation remains difficult, with Russian forces repeatedly advancing from the east, reaching the edge of Novomykhailivka and being pushed back. This is going to be a rare defense of the Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armod. Yesterday, Armod reported fighting in the area of Shevchenka, but specifically stated in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, which is near Gulyai-Pole, if you use the old Soviet-era village names. We don't think the Kremlin was trying to deceive anyone, and almost every analyst and mail blogger has been tripped up by Ukrainian geography, including us. There are many Shevchenkas in Ukraine. The fighting was just north of the Shevchenka in Donetsk Oblast. A graphic video from the Ukrainian 58th Motorized Brigade shows that Russian forces suffered catastrophic losses and were forced to withdraw. Yes, we'll link to that video too, but that's not the one to watch. In the Staromlynivka AO, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported Russian attacks from Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk. Okay, if you're going to watch one video from today's podcast, this is the one to watch. In occupied Staromlynivka, Russian armored vehicles were hidden in 3 large barns. A 2-minute video showed multiple Ukrainian one-way drones flying through the open doors of the buildings, destroying main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, an S-60 anti-aircraft gun, and a rare Bram-1 armored recovery vehicle. This is the stuff of science fiction. In occupied Trudivske, new members of the Russian 39th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade waited outside for a speech from Major General Oleg Moiseev, reported as both the first deputy commander or the commander of the 29th Combined Arms Army. The formation was hit by 3 rockets fired by HIMARS, with Russian sources reporting 65 soldiers killed. The Russian reports appear accurate, with graphic videos and pictures showing dozens of dead soldiers. Moving to assessment. This is the second incident where Russian troops were forced to wait in formation for a general to give a speech, which resulted in an attack. It is highly unusual for the videos and pictures to be readily shared by Russian sources in the public domain. In our assessment, the information was released as a protest of incompetent commanders. Near occupied Mariupol, the Crimean Tatar insurgent organization Atesh reported that convoys carrying hundreds of burned-out pieces of Russian military equipment were being hauled in the direction of Crimea. Fighting continued in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, and there are no indications Russia is setting conditions for a larger offensive. In the Orikhiv AO, Russian forces attacked east of Mala Tokmachka and south and west of Robotine. Russian forces have been attacking with BMP-1 IFVs and T-55 and T-62 medium-duty tanks. Like the T-62, which first appeared in the summer of 2022, Armored vowed that T-55 would only be used for indirect fire. The use of 1960s and 1970s equipment indicates that reserve forces are limited, or Russian troops in the Dnipro group have limited access to more modern armor. On February the 18th, Russian soldiers executed at least 3 Ukrainian prisoners of war, the third incident in a week. There is more information in the War Crimes and Human Rights section. The Kremlin made wild claims about the situation in the Kherson AO. Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu claimed that Krynke had been recaptured in a staged meeting with President Vladimir Putin. Operational Command South denied the claim, saying that Russia had resorted to, quote, manipulation and falsification of facts. After the claims, Russian propagandist Romanov Light said, quote, all the fuss about the supposed liberation of the settlement was organized for the purpose of obtaining the rank of general by an individual, adding that Shoigu, quote, lies to the president's face, unquote. You know, I'm not going to miss Romanov Light when the political officers come for him. Russia released a video of 2 soldiers entering the settlement very close to where they already have control, raising 2 flags and running for their lives. The flag has already been taken down, and Russia released a video of a single Ukrainian Marine holding off an entire squad in approximately the same area. Based on the new intelligence, we expanded the grey area, but Ukrainian troops have not been pushed out of Krynke.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. The Security Service of Ukraine notified Ukrainian national and Russian propagandist Dmytro Kornichuk that he is under investigation for, quote, justification of armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine and glorification of its participants. In 2022, we exerted a lot of energy debunking Kornichuk's claims, and he has appeared on Russian channels 112 Ukraine, Nash, and News One. If convicted, he faces the loss of property and assets and up to 8 years in prison. Ukrainian officials reported that Kyiv was close to completing security agreements with the Netherlands and Denmark. These would follow the same outline as agreements established with France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. As expected, Sweden announced a $683 million military aid package, its largest for Ukraine. Details about the 15th package is in our situation report. You can become a patron for just $5 a month, and there is more information in the podcast description. Bulgaria is delaying the shipment of 100 Cold War-era Soviet BTR-60 armored personnel carriers. A Bulgarian official said, quote, "We cannot transport 100 armored personnel carriers from Sofia to Rusa without funding from NATO." What's going on in the world of Mobiks, Mobilization and Mir? Rage about the Russian losses at Avdiivka continues to grow. Russian mercenary male blogger and former private military company Wagner Group fighter 13th tore into Minister of Defense Shoigu after the head of the Russian military gave an interview. Quote, "Shoigu talks about the capture of Avdiivka and the defeat of the counteroffensive of the Ukrainian armed forces against the background of Suvorov, Kutuzov and Zhukov. This doesn't amuse me anymore. They took this poor Avdiivka for almost 10 years, 8 years of positioning and 2 years of bloody assaults. They killed the people. What the fuck? Vovka from my team still lies unknown where for almost a year on the Avdiivka fortifications." Unquote. Putin's Purge claimed another high-profile critic of the Kremlin. On February the 20th, I told you about Russian meme blogger Andrei Morozov, better known as Murs. He had a meltdown on his Telegram channel about the Russian losses at Avdiivka. After some of his readers threatened to file denunciations against him, he blasted the Kremlin and Russian military commanders, daring his readers to have him arrested. On the same day, Murs reported he was threatened with arrest and made a drastic decision. Quote, "Today I talked to a man who, knowing me a little, started right away with this. You won't change things, the elections will be held and no changes will begin. Today, Comrade Colonel, on your order, I was forced to delete the post from my Telegram channel. And your command forced you to give this order, relying on good old army collective responsibility. Your command was forced to do this by political prostitutes led by Vladimir Solovyov, who are pissing themselves to come and pull the trigger. Well, I'll do it myself. I will shoot myself if no one dares to take on this trifling matter. It turned out that I cannot serve under your command, under the command of a man who took over a decapitated brigade in a critical situation in a critical area and removed the situation. I cannot serve under you and at the same time tell the truth. If I can't change anything, then you will have to win the war yourself." Murs proceeded to write a quasi-manifesto and a last will. Multiple Russian male bloggers and current and former unit members are reporting that Murs carried through with his threat and killed himself. Mental illness and suicide are sensitive topics, and their discussion can trigger strong feelings. If you are having suicidal thoughts or you're despondent, there is help available. United States 988 or 800-273-8255. You can text 741-741. Veterans can text 838-255. Canada 833-456-4566 or text 45645. United Kingdom 0800-689-5652 or 999. Australia 131114 or 000 or text 0477 13 11 14. New Zealand 0508 828 865 or 111. Assessment: Morozov was a turbo-patriot and nationalist with extremist views. He was also a radio communications expert who helped resolve many issues on the front lines in 2022 and 2023. But Murs was one other thing, one of the last semi-lucid Russian male bloggers who visited frontline units and did not regurgitate Kremlin propaganda. This is why Morozov was on a collision course with Moscow. So, considering what Romanov Light and 13th wrote yesterday, which one do you think gets visited by the political officers next? In our War Crimes and Human Rights section, we sometimes discuss atrocities, gender-based violence, torture, cruelty to animals, and human suffering. Today's report does not present graphic content. As I mentioned earlier, on February the 18th, a drone video recorded 3 Ukrainian soldiers being executed by Russian troops after surrendering south of Robotine. Ukrainian soldier Viktor Burlek told Espresso TV that Russian troops were executing POWs in the hopes of catching Ukrainians treating Russian POWs the same. Quote, "Because the number of people willing to surrender among the Russians is increasing, the Russians want us to treat their prisoners in the same way as they do." Unquote. Speaking at the US Helsinki Commission on Holding Russia to Accountability for War Crimes Against Ukraine, Lessons from Nuremberg Forum in Nuremberg, Germany, President Zelensky said, quote, "There is no crime against humanity and life that has not been committed by Putin's Russia and those who work for its insane dictator. The world saw Ukrainian cities and villages burned by the Russian army. Everyone in the world has at least heard of the mass murders that inevitably follow the Russian tricolor across the occupied territory. It is impossible to come to terms with the pain of families that were separated by Putin's war and the deportation of Ukrainian children. We should also not forget about the millions of Ukrainians who survived under the Russian occupation, deprived of even basic human rights. Let there be no obstacles on the way of justice. Just like Nazism, Putin's state must be condemned. I call upon all who are in a position to hasten the coming of real peace." Unquote. We don't end the podcast with war crimes. However, our team couldn't find a feel-good story, so this bit of economic news was the best we could find. The European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simpson, said that the EU is no longer interested in extending the natural gas transit contract with Russia. A return to the usual relations with Russia is impossible. We have been preparing for the end of this contract for 2 years since the manipulation of the gas market began, and we have alternative options to ensure the security of supply. While Russia was able to prop up its economy with oil sales in 2023, the natural gas market plummeted due to a warmer-than-expected winter, conservation, and establishment of alternative sources of natural gas faster than expected. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com@malcontentnews.